This video shows you how to use the Marketing module in iClarity. To access the Marketing module, click on the yellow arrow on the right hand side of the module icons at the bottom of the page. This will display a new set of icons. Click on the new icon called Marketing. By default, when you open the Marketing module, it is set to Marketing mode, which means it will only list and communicate with patients that have the appropriate communication preferences. If a letter communication is selected, all patients with an address will be displayed. If a patient has the Stop All Marketing checkbox ticked, they will not be shown in the Marketing Targets list. Email communication is selected, then only patients who have an email address and have answered yes to receiving email news updates will be listed. The email news update is an option on the front page of a patient's record. If a patient has the Stop All Marketing's checkbox ticked, they will not be displayed in the marketing list. If an SMS communication is selected, then only patients who have a mobile phone number and have said yes to contact by SMS will be listed. Any patients with the Stop All Marketing checkbox ticked will not be listed. Use the Marketing module to send information communication to all of your patients and ignore the marketing communication preferences. Then tick the box at the top of the screen called Ignore Communication Preferences. Now, if a letter communication is selected, then all patients with an address will be shown in the Marketing Targets list, regardless of their communication preferences. If an email communication is selected, then patients who have an email address with either the communication preference of yes or no will be listed. If an SMS communication is selected, then patients who have a mobile phone number with either the communication preference of yes or recall only will be listed. If a patient's communication preference is set to phone only for an SMS contact or declined for an email news update, will not be listed in the Marketing module, even when the Ignore Communication Preference button is selected. That is because the patient has declined to be contacted by these modes of communication at all. You can also use the Marketing module to research your patient database and see how many and which types of patients fall into different demographic selections. To ignore all communication preferences and search the patient database, tick the Search Patient Database checkbox. All patients fitting your chosen criteria will now be listed, regardless of what contact information they have on their record. Selecting a communication. The available marketing communications that can be sent from this module are listed in the drop-down at the top of the screen. Click on the arrow in the drop-down to show a list of the available communications. Clicking on the Preview button next to the drop-down list will show a preview of the communication that is going to be sent. The criteria available down the left-hand side will allow you to use your patient demographic information to create a targeted marketing list. Ticking the box next to a criteria will activate it in the demographic search and allow you to add a value to the search. Clicking on the View Sales Analysis criteria will show more criteria options linked to sale information and analysis codes. The postcode area criteria looks at patients' postcodes, starting with the value entered. You could enter just the first two letters which would search for everybody who had a postcode that began with CF. Or you could add more. This would search for everybody who had a postcode that started with CF15, but would leave out patients whose postcode started with CF14, for example. No eye exam since and has eye exam since looks at the patient's most recent prescription date, not counting retests, non-site tests, and non-site test valid prescriptions. Eye exam due from and eye exam due to looks at the next due date of a patient's most recent prescription, not counting retest, non-site test, and non-site test valid prescriptions. No contact lens checkup since looks at the patient's most recent contact lens prescription of any type, unless created from the trials form and not brought through to the contact lens prescription. Has contact lens prescription. If this is set to yes, it looks at patients with any contact lens prescription of any type, unless created from the trials form and not brought through to the contact lens prescription. Minimum sphere, SIL and add, and maximum sphere, SIL and add looks at the patient's most recent prescription, not counting retest, non-site test and non-site test valid prescriptions. No recall since looks for patients who have not received a recall communication since the specified date. No recall due before will list patients who have no unsent recall communications due to go before this date. No appointments after. This will list patients who do not have appointments booked after the entered date. Looking at the appointment diary for all branches. No appointment before. This lists any patient that has not got an appointment booked before the entered date, looking at the appointment diary for all branches. Minimum and maximum date of birth. We'll check the patient's date of birth field on their record. Birthday from and to. We'll check the patient's date of birth field on their record, ignoring the year of birth. Fallen off recall from will list patients whose recalls are not stopped. There are no recall communications due to be sent, and the last recall was sent on or after the entered date, and the patient has no appointment booked today or in the future. Fallen off recall to list patients who don't have recalls stopped. There's no recall communication due to be sent, and the last recall was sent on or before the entered date, and the patient has no appointment booked today or in the future. Joined from looks for patient records who have a join date after the entered date. Joined to looks for patient records who have a join date before the entered date. Patient source will look for any patient that has the selected patient source option selected on their patient record in the Further Details tab. No marketing since will only include patients in the list that have not received a marketing communication since the specified date. It looks at the patient communication tab and the communications sent and marked as marketing and not part of the recall scheme. No specs purchased since looks for patients that have not had a transaction with a specs reference since the specified date. Specs purchased since looks for patients that have had a transaction with specs reference since the specified date. Purchased specs costing between looks for patients who have had transactions with a specs reference that have a value between the amounts entered. Purchased sunspecs costing between looks for patients who have had transactions of a product group of sunspecs with a value between the amounts entered. Purchased products from supplier looks for patients who have transactions of a product that is linked to the supplier entered. Purchased products called looks for patients who have transactions with a product description containing the text entered. Purchased products from range looks for patients who have transactions of a product where the product range contains this text. Has these analysis codes. This will list any patients that have the selected analysis code marked as selected on their record. If more than one analysis code is selected in this box, then the patient has to have all of the codes to be included in the marketing target list. For example, if you were searching for patients with audiology and contact lens wearer analysis codes, if a patient only has the audiology analysis code, they will not be pulled through under this criteria. None of these analysis codes. A patient will be excluded off the marketing target list if they have any of the selected codes assigned. Please see